In this chapter, we'll be giving a brief overview of the Internet and the World Wide Web. So first, we'll talk about the Internet. And for the purposes of this class, I don't want you to think of the Internet as anything other than multiple computers connected together. So generally speaking, when we say the Internet, we're talking about a worldwide network. It was started as a government project initially, and no one controls the Internet, so to speak. Although some governments censor what their citizens can access. And so obviously that isn't the case in the United States, although if you've been following the news recently, there's some discussion around the government's ability to control and or track activity on the internet. But generally speaking, it's worldwide connection between multiple computers that no one really has governance over. No single group has governance over the internet. An internet service provider, or an ISP, is a company that provides access to the internet for a fee. So there are a few different levels of service. Generally speaking, these days you see high speed more often than dial-up, but I'm sure many of you remember dial-up. High speed is generally DSL cable. Some people have satellite. And then usually people set up a wireless local network in their home through either DSL cable or satellite. And then depending on who you ask, you may or may not consider your cellular network a high-speed internet connection. It also depends on what type of internet connection you have through your cellular device. Some examples of ISPs are Comcast, Xfinity, AT&T, whomever that you pay an amount every month so that you can have internet in your home is your internet service provider. So we've talked about this before, but some of the things that you do over the internet are email, instant messaging, file transfer, which is generally used for larger files than email. If anybody uses Dropbox, that's an example of file transfer. Database searches. Every time you query Google, it's technically a database search, but also when you're finding a research article on CINAHL, that's a database search. Remote logon. So oftentimes you can log on to one computer from another computer remotely. That's also how your support staff logs on your computer and helps you when you have an issue with your computer as a remote logon. And then also discussion boards like we have in the class and news groups. Or general consumption of any information or contribution to sites that contain information are all activities that are done via the internet. So I probably don't have to give everyone a definition of email, but generally speaking, it's using computers to transmit messages to one another through almost instant delivery. I think we've all experienced when the delivery isn't instant. I've had some experiences with that with the email that UD Mercy offers that I can share when we're together in person. But you can also transfer files that we attach to the email message and can be sent anywhere in the world as long as the person has an email address and as long as that email address lets the message through their network and doesn't put it into your spam folder. Also, email isn't just limited to text messages without attachments. These days you can send HTML email messages or rich text email messages as well. So an email address is based on a username and a domain name. And so a lot of times you see that based on the company you work for, you have your username first and then the symbol @ and then you have the organization name and then a .edu if it's a university, .com, .org, depending on who your employer is. Suggest that at least 23 individuals with the same first name and initial and last name at that facility when you see numerals before or after the name. An EDU in this example is domain name indicating that it's an educational facility. So there's usually a lot that you can determine just by the email address. A lot of times the name or the email addresses are standard. So a lot of times it's first name dot last name, or it's first initial last name, or sometimes it's last name up to a certain number of characters and then first initial, middle initial, like it is with UD Mercy. So at UD Mercy, my email is makowsjt@udmercy.edu. Another utility you can use on the internet is instant messaging. It's interactive, real-time text messaging back and forth that happens over your computers. You can also do text messaging over your cell phones. That's a type of instant messaging, or any other mobile device. So Facebook instant messages, etc. A lot of times it relies on abbreviations so that communication can be really quick. It also uses emoticons or emojis, so little smiley faces to convey emotion. It's more popular among adolescents and young adults, although it's becoming somewhat ubiquitous in terms of being used by everyone. I know that my grandmother is approaching 80, and she is an avid text messenger as well, so it's becoming quite common. And it's sometimes used in work settings, and so that may be something that some of you are interested in looking up, is use of iPhones and text messaging for nursing handoff and rounds and nursing communication in general is something that's come up more recently in the literature. So file transfer is moving files from one location to another over a network that's distinct from email. File transfer protocol controls the transfer of the data, and it's useful, generally speaking, for files that are too big to send by email. So when you have really large files, sometimes songs or videos or many documents that are too big for email, or you're not having success getting them sent via email, you can use a file transfer service. Like I said, one that's readily available to lay persons that's not through your work is Dropbox. And so these generally you can find a lot of different file transfer services for free up to a certain storage limit. So I think Dropbox gives you a gig or a couple gigs for free, and then they offer additional services that you can pay for, and the same is true for some other file transfer services. So database searches is really allowing the user to access a database or a large storage of information, like a literature database like CINAHL, and you can access it through private subscription usually as an individual, or through a license through your organization. So when you access CINAHL today, you're accessing it through University of Detroit Mercy's license. Searches can be done in a fraction of the time required to manually search through paper resources. So I don't think I have to explain much more what a benefit it is for you to be able to type in a couple keywords into CINAHL and find relevant literature, versus visiting a library in person and trying to find a hard copy of an article for you to write about. Again, remote logon allows users to access computer facilities from a separate location. So you can use it to view files at work or access remote databases at libraries. So some people work part-time at home and part-time in the office, and they have a dedicated office computer, and so that they have consistency in their work and they can store all their files at work. What they do is, instead of taking that computer back and forth, or if their computer at work is a desktop, they will remotely log in from home into their work computer. It requires users to establish an account that permits access. So it's not something random people across the internet cannot remote log on into your system, generally speaking. So this is something that you have to set up permissions to do up front. So don't expect to just go home and then be able to log into your work computer unless it's something that you have established ahead of time. So this is the part where we tell you to be careful about email. So you want to make sure you're HIPAA compliant and that you're not sending patient information across email unless it's within the firewall of your organization, and unless you're using the protocol designated by your organization and the software that you use in your organization to keep those emails safe and HIPAA compliant. Proper use of email is also really important, and what they're citing here in this slide is etiquette or netiquette, is the internet sort of lingo. And you want to make sure that you're not forwarding messages that you're not supposed to forward. You want to make sure that your messages are appropriate in tone and in the language that you're using. And you want to make sure that your emails are concise. Generally speaking, a long email doesn't really get read. I don't know what the most recent studies are saying, but I've read a couple that said that, somebody only reads the first couple sentences of an email, and then the rest of it either doesn't get read or it certainly doesn't get remembered. You also have to be careful what you click on in your email, especially your personal email, when you get messages that could be harmful to you, harmful to your identity, or harmful to your computer, that could carry viruses, worms, spyware. So if it's not from a source that you recognize, and if there's anything seems unusual about the subject line or the address that the email is coming from, or if the email says it's representing one company, but when you see the link that's within that email is going to something completely different, those are all things to watch out for and to not trust and not click on. A couple other quick concerns is that there's an overwhelming volume of email being sent and received, and so you have to watch out for spam. So these are unsolicited sales messages that are sent to mass audiences, and generally speaking, you get these, they're usually nothing more than an irritation, and we can filter them out and or delete them. But there's also phishing, which is when someone sends you an email, whether a person or they have it automatically sent, and it's requesting your information either directly by pretending to be somebody that you know, or maybe somebody that you know their account has been compromised, or like I mentioned before, it's posing as a company that you may have an association with, and they want you to click on something, and it's going to give up your personal information by following down that route. So just be wary of the email that you receive and vet it before you just go opening things and clicking on links. So most of our experience of this thing called the internet is via the World Wide Web. And so rather than thinking more in terms of really the hardware and the software that exists to connect to the computers that form the internet, the World Wide Web is really an information service that accesses data by content instead of file names. And it's really how you experience the internet. It supports multimedia, text, images, sound, links to other document, videos, all sorts of different resources. Depending on who you ask, it has an easy-to-use graphical interface. Graphical user interfaces, or GUI, and it allows users to search for content using a browser, which we'll talk about in a little bit. The key here is that this is taking what is essentially just a bunch of computers connected together that you normally wouldn't be able to search and navigate as an average person, and it's representing it to you in a way that's graphical and relatively easy to use. So generally speaking, whenever you experience the internet, you're using the World Wide Web. So one of the hallmarks of using the web are links or hyperlinks. And these are words or phrases or images that are distinguished in some way from the rest of the page. A lot of times wording is changed to a different color and underlined. The most common is blue and underlined. Or the word or image does something different when you take your mouse and you hover over it. It'll change colors or pop out in some way, letting you know that it's pressable, it's clickable. And when you click on these links, they take you to a different page. So links allow users to skip from point to point within or among a document or website using the URL, which is the address for each page. So each link has a URL address behind it, which allows you to go from your current point to the new point based on the address that is contained in that link. A web page is the content or the site that's seen at that particular address. So the home page is generally speaking the first page that is seen at a website, a web location, and it contains general information and usually has navigation along the top or along the left-hand side that can get you to the different pages within the larger context of the web page. And it's really the starting point. It's usually the message that whatever this company is or resource is, it's usually the first point where they're trying to communicate to you who they are, what they do, and why you want to stay on that page and click through everything else that they have to offer. So you hear the book will reference Web 2.0 tools a few times. And these are tools that improve the ability to share information between people. They may or may not be open source and available to download free of charge, or they may have a charge associated with them. And a few that you've seen already cited our blog, which is kind of like a journal that a person writes on a regular or semi-regular basis, and a wiki, which is a little bit more collaborative and involves multiple contributors. And we cited Wikipedia as sort of an encyclopedia and a wiki combined. So we've said address and URL a couple times, but it's warranted that we stop and define it really quickly. So a uniform resource located, or a URL, is a string of characters, numbers, letters, symbols that are similar to a postal address on your house. And it identifies a document's web location and the type of server on which it resides. So when we say URL, what we're really talking about is the address and what's usually the top bar in your browser. And so as an example, I pulled the knowledge URL, which is https://knowledge.udmercy.edu. So RSS feeds we mentioned briefly before, but it's really simple syndication. It's the delivery of updated web content to users instead of you having to go and check the site routinely for updated content. Many websites and blogs have links to RSS feeds that you can subscribe to and read. And so I have a couple of these that I've shared with before that I have subscriptions to through my email. So instead of checking the website frequently, I just go to my email and I can see all the new posts right there. A browser is software. It's a program that retrieves hypertext and hypermedia documents on the web using HTTP or FTP. And so that may not make sense to you, but if I say your browser is Internet Explorer, Mozilla, Chrome, or Safari, then you'll know what I'm talking about. So the browser is the application that you use to actually view the World Wide Web. Now, in some ways, search tools and browsers have become a little bit synonymous, especially with Google having a browser and a search tool, and now Internet Explorer having Bing and Internet Explorer both being Microsoft. But the most common search tools initially weren't browsers themselves, but just as a couple examples here, you have Yahoo, Google, and Bing. There are tens, if not hundreds more. But these are tools to help you retrieve information on the web, because obviously you don't know the URL address for every website that might have information that you potentially want. So you start with one of these services and you type in terms about what you're looking for, and then it'll help you find the web page that may have the content that you're looking for. And so these search tools have Boolean logic, so you can say and or when you're searching. If you put a plus next to your search term, then that means that term is required. If you put a minus next to it, that means, I don't want that word. That when you put things in quotes, you're searching for that term exactly and not as separate terms. An example might be that I am particularly fond of University of Michigan because I went there, and not of Michigan State. So if I wanted to make sure that I got Michigan results and not state results, I might search for Michigan and then put a minus sign next to state so that I don't get Michigan State results in my search. Social media sites are websites that allow people to connect with one another online. A social network describes a website that allows people to create a profile and interact with one another. Generally speaking, on these sites, content is user-generated through posts or people submitting pictures or videos online. So obviously the social networking space is changing rapidly and has undergone a lot of changes just in the last 5 years or so. But here you can see images and a list of just a few really common ones. The one that I want to point you towards that you may not be aware of is LinkedIn, largely because that is a professional social networking site. And so if you want to interact with other professionals and see what are essentially people's resumes online, that might be an interesting website for you to check out. So at this point you might be asking, what does this have to do with nursing or informatics? And the reason that electronic communication is significant is that it increases your access to information. Unlike never before, you can go online and find just about anything that you could possibly want to find. And for someone who's focused on healthcare and informatics and advancing as a professional, that's a really powerful tool. So there are a lot of resources for both healthcare consumers and care providers, professionals. Information is disseminated more rapidly, so the time between a study being done and it being available online to clinicians who can implement it into practice is much shorter than it was before. And anyone can post material, which is sometimes very, very beneficial because many more people have access to post content and consume content, so there are fewer barriers to getting that information. But at the same time, the quality is not all the same. So because anyone can post, anything could be out there, and not all of it is accurate or of high quality. Some of the ways that we use it in healthcare are through education, both our clinicians and our patients, marketing the services that we provide to the community, access to benchmarking information, so to compare the services that we provide and the quality that we provide against other similar institutions in our area, And it's a new means to provide healthcare services, so you can actually conduct visits with patients online. Again, some concerns related to using the internet in healthcare. The quality of information is not always very good. Too much traffic at one time on a site can lead to collapse. I think we've all heard about what happened with healthcare.gov. And if you don't, just type that into a Google search and see what articles you can find. Security, so is your information secure? Are there restrictions on that information that protect it? Are there policies that help maintain the security? Malware, which is all types of malicious computer programs that can steal your information or wreck your hardware and your software. So these are all things that can definitely negatively affect your experience on the internet. So we've mentioned information quality a couple times on the internet now. And so here are a couple tips for determining if the information is good or not. And so you have to look at the credential of the source. So is this just some random person posting, or is it an institution or organization that's very much trusted and has a lot of expertise? Can you validate the information with another source? How accurate or comprehensive is it? Is it current, or is it multiple years old? Is there bias, or is there a sponsorship or some other financial reason why there might be a bias in the content? Is the website easy to navigate? Are the links current, or are they broken? What's the purpose behind the website? Who is the website speaking to? Because a website that's intended to educate physicians, while accurate and up to date, is not going to be very useful for a patient to get education, because the health literacy levels of those two audiences are very different. Are there any legal disclaimers on the site? Is the site accredited in any way? And do they state their privacy policies and/or make you, accept any terms by using the content on their site? So finally, we're not going to go in depth about security and use of the internet, but generally speaking, you should get familiar with the terms firewall and antivirus software. Basically, make sure that you have antivirus software. If your health institution has a policy about how to use their information systems securely, follow those. Know that generally speaking, if you're working in a healthcare environment, your organization has a firewall that protects the information used internally there, and that you should honor the policies that they have in place so that you don't put any of that information at risk. Make sure that on your home computers you're downloading security features that are part of your operating system. Make sure that you have some sort of antivirus, anti-malware software on your computer. Even your browsers these days, if you're about to click a link that may be harmful to you, a lot of times it'll warn you and say, Google Chrome thinks that this link is harmful. Are you sure you want to go forward, based on the content of the website, or based on previous reports on that URL, or because the certificate in that website is off. So just use your best judgment. Make sure that things like security patches on your operating system and that your antivirus is up to date. Follow your institutional policies, and just use your best judgment to make sure that you keep yourself and your patients safe.